this is the last week of Brave, Courage to Build Bridges Instead of Walls. And we've talked about immigration. We talked about wealth inequality. Last week, we talked about gun control. And this week, we're talking about the issue of same-sex marriage. And we live in a divided America. Statistics show that, but we don't need to see the stats in order to know that. We know we live in a divided culture, and perhaps the greatest thing that followers of Jesus could do in our time to model the love of Jesus is to look for ways to build bridges that would cross the divides in our culture. Some of you feel this in your families. Some of you can't talk about certain subjects with people in your families because you know it would just go bad, and so you just avoid those things. There's some pain there. That you can't be as close in some ways as you would like to be. So perhaps we could build a bridge as followers of Jesus and look at the best facts we have available to us and figure out a rational way forward. We don't want to be presumptive. We're not going to solve all the problems, but actually there have been bipartisan pieces of legislation sponsored by Republicans and Democrats in all of these issues that could move us forward, but the division just holds up the process, and this issue is no different. So to see the division in our culture, a Gallup poll in May of this year found that, check this out, 78% of American 18 to 29-year-olds support the legalization of same-sex marriage. Isn't that a staggering statistic? That just means set your watch. Over time, same-sex marriage is going to become legal in all 50 states, while only 45% of evangelical young adults do. And so this is first of all, it's kind of worth noting that almost half of young evangelicals support same-sex marriage. That's kind of surprising. I thought it would be lower than that. But at the same time, we have a 33-point gap between the general population, we're just talking about younger people here, between the general population of Americans and evangelicals. And evangelicals are a type of Christian in the United States, and the stats are showing that those who oppose same-sex marriage in the United States now, at this point in history, tend to be white evangelicals. So there's a divide between the general American culture and white evangelical Christians. Young adults, in general, seem to have no problem with same-sex marriage, but there are many churches in this area who do. And this is amazing. Over the past few months, I've had 3 dads tell me something similar. And I didn't seek this out. They sought me out to tell me this. They said the reason they bring their children to one church is because they want, this is their words, they want their children to grow up in a church they won't be embarrassed of when they're adults. I felt like I owed them money after they told me that. Like you could not pay for advertising better than to hear a parent say something like that. And they reference this issue as well. What they're saying is they know math, and they know as their children, these kids back in One Church Kids right now, when these kids become adults, they're not going to have any problem with same-sex marriage. American culture is not going to have any problem with same-sex marriage. And they don't want their kids to get to college and have one of those awkward family conversations and say, Mom and Dad, why did you take me to a church where they, even in a time when America was changing, they loudly proclaimed values that are now considered backward or worse? Mom and Dad, why did you do that? And now I have to figure out, what do I really believe? And does God feel this way? And they have this crisis of faith. And those parents have the wisdom and the foresight to look ahead. And they said they want to raise their kids in a church they won't be embarrassed of when they grow up. Wow. Amazing. We're even seeing changes in the sports world. Less than a couple of weeks ago, an ASU football player named Chip Seraphin became the first Division I college football player to come out as gay. Did you know that? Right here at ASU. And so sports is not the most gay-friendly place in the world, but we're seeing changes even in the sports world. Public opinion is rapidly changing. So today we're exploring how can we bridge this gap between the general American population and white evangelicals. It's a tradition I grew up in. How can we bridge that gap? If you've been around One Church for a while, you'll know that my views on same-sex marriage will not surprise you. Last October, I gave a sermon in which I said I had gay friends in high school, and I have people in this congregation now who are gay, and I made it very clear I don't call people who are gay sinners. I don't condemn people in same-sex relationships as sinners. My position is one of acceptance. So it would be no surprise to you that I support the legalization of same-sex marriage in all 50 states. And I think that's happening. And it's going to happen sooner than some think. Now, I understand, however, because I grew up in a conservative evangelical tradition, and we're looking to build a bridge, and these are well-meaning people who love God and love the Bible, and they love people too. So I understand what it sounds like to hear what I just said to somebody from that tradition. What it sounds like is that pastor just said something unimaginable. He just said something that is unthinkable. How could a Christian pastor preaching a sermon, this is a church, right? On a Sunday morning, and he just said that out loud. How could that happen? I understand where folks like that would come from because I grew up in that environment. And in my opinion, I'm giving you my opinion, those feelings have more to do with politics than they do religion. I remember Christian TV being on in my household. And I remember every day the televangelist speaking to political issues. Evangelical Christians have been subject to a constant drumbeat of political rhetoric for the past 30 years. And the televangelist would be talking about how essentially Jesus publishes voter guides, and Jesus is involved in American elections very closely, and if you love Jesus, you have to vote in this way. And every time they mention gay people or anything like that, the camera shot would cut to footage of like the most wild, colorful scene from a gay pride parade somewhere. And in their mind, that was every time. And that was a way of saying, oh, these people are wild and out of control. And by the way, way more fun than the televangelist. But he didn't mean to say that. But that was the image that was being projected there. And an increasing amount of evangelicals that I know are beginning to feel resentful toward those politicians because they know they've been had. They know that they got worked. Their religion was used against them by politicians who wanted to grab a hold of the Bible and use their interpretation of the Bible to get votes. Throughout history, religion is one of the greatest cultural unifiers. If you want to win an election or gain support of the people, you tap into what's already unifying people. Do you see what I'm saying? Religion, prejudice, other social movements, and you tap in and you get them to vote for you. And a lot of evangelicals are figuring out that this is what has happened. Well, what's left of that political takeover of evangelical faith is that the average unchurched American has a very negative view of Christians. The book Unchristian, What a New Generation Really Thinks About Christianity and Why It Matters, by Dave Kinnaman and Gabe Lyons, published a study. And this is an absolutely tragic statistic. They found that 91% of unchurched 20-somethings view Christians as anti-gay. That is an absolute tragedy. When I was sitting in a coffee shop this week, typing those words out, I actually got an ache in my gut as I read that statistic. No matter what you believe about this issue, that is an absolute tragedy. The love of Jesus, what Jesus stands for, listen to this, in the minds of the very people that all of us churches say we're trying to reach, what they think of when they think of Christians, over 9 out of 10, anti-gay, my goodness. You know, we're starting a new church here trying to reach people who are unchurched and de-churched people, and we have our work cut out for us. When you read a tragic statistic like that, and a lot of it is the fault of people who co-opted faith for political reasons. 91%. Well, while evangelicals are struggling about this issue, since I gave that sermon in October, same-sex marriage has been legalized in 5 more states. That was only 10 months ago. It's now legal in 19 states plus the District of Columbia. Some of those were court decisions, but what's going on is even if the state legislature, easy for me to say, wants to fight that, they're finding that public opinion in their state is only a couple years away from supporting same-sex marriage anyway. So you've got a situation like in Utah where they could spend $2 million in court fees, and then the people of Utah are very close, actually, believe it or not, of having a majority support for same-sex marriage. They could essentially blow $2 million and then have an election, and the people of Utah say, okay, legalize it. That's the situation that we're in now as more states make same-sex marriage legal. 44% of Americans now live in a state where same-sex marriage is legal, or states, and that's now a majority of the people in the United States. Here's a map I showed in October, 10 months ago. The states in blue had legal same-sex marriage. The states in red had bans. The stripes are somewhere in between. Now here's the map now. And here's a map from 538blog.com, who made projections about the legalization of same-sex marriage, and he's been accurate so far. And here's a map of 2020. And like I said back then, because I showed the same map then, I have family in the South. My ancestors fought for the Confederacy. But we've seen this pattern before, haven't we? As a matter of fact, we've seen this pattern every major social issue in the United States. So according to Gallup, again in May of this year, 55% of Americans now support same-sex marriage. Again, 78%, that's staggering, of 18 to 29-year-olds are supportive. Support among Republicans has doubled since 1996. And then check this out. Here's why that map might not even be right. Check this out. According to region, the same Gallup poll, here's support by region. In the East, 67% of the population support same-sex marriage. The West, 58%. Midwest, 53%. Look at the South. This is the South. This is the Bible Belt South. Almost at 50%. Here in 2 or 3 years, it's safe to say there will be majority support in the South, for same-sex marriage. That's amazing how fast public opinion has changed on this issue. Now, it's not just an American issue. Here's a world map again. I showed this before. Same-sex marriage is now legal in 17 countries, mostly in Europe and South America. Australia and Colombia are close behind. They probably will legalize it soon. There were several people that told me after they saw this map in October, and I explained what it meant, that it was a game changer for them. That we can have theological debates and talk about interpretation, but this map shows the real world situation right now on planet Earth regarding this issue. The countries in green grant various degrees of human rights or civil unions or marriage rights to people who are gay. The countries in gray are not really friendly toward people who are gay. The countries in red either imprison or execute people who are gay. Now, assuming that we know a little bit about our world geography, where would you rather live? For me, when I realized this last fall, I thought, my goodness, what is there left to say? And the truth is, we know that the countries in red have adopted their positions primarily motivated by religion. So, now I suppose if you think the United States is down here, this map isn't powerful. But otherwise, I think we all know our geography pretty well here. We fully understand. Got it. I would rather live in a society that grants rights to everybody, including people who are gay, because this is the real world situation. And I'm sorry for the parent who has child 577 while I was pointing at the map. There you go. You can attend to your child back in One Church Kids. So, to look at how fast public opinion has changed, a couple more stats. This chart is from the same Gallup poll. You won't be able to see this, but to the far left is 1996. To the far right is 2014. Current support is at 55%. Support is the green line. Say that marriages between same-sex couples should be recognized by the law as valid, like traditional marriage, with the same rights. Now 55% of Americans say that. It was only 27% in 1996. That is an incredibly fast change of opinion. And there's also another map that we can compare this to from the Gallup poll in U.S. history. And let's go to that next map. Right now, again, 55% of Americans support same-sex marriage. That's about the same percentage of Americans who in 1994 thought it was okay for blacks and whites to get married. Is that shocking to anybody? Somewhere around the time I was listening to Pearl Jam, 55% of Americans, only 55% of Americans thought it was okay to have legal interracial marriage. Now that's at 86%. And so you can see how these trends work in American history and where the opinion on same-sex marriage will probably be 20 years from now. One more stat, this is just for your entertainment. Earlier this month, the Public Religion Research Institute conducted a poll and found that 42% of Walmart shoppers support same-sex marriage, while only 62% of Target shoppers do. So here's what's happened. Target knows this. Target has just joined a list of companies, a growing list of companies. Among them are Starbucks, Apple, Intel, who publicly endorse same-sex marriage as a company. Target realized this is good for our business. We've reached the point where many companies who are just really interested in the profit, the bottom line, are realizing this is good for business. Remember a few months ago, right? Here in this area, when the state senator from Chandler introduced a law into the state legislature to say that there are businesses who could turn people away because they're gay. And there was a public outcry, and some people said, well, that's just immoral. That's like a Jim Crow law from the segregation era. We don't want that here. A lot of people just said, you know what, that'll be bad for business. And they're right. Both are true. Not only is it something out of the segregation era, but it's just bad for business. Now, a couple more things. The most important development in the gay rights movement occurred in June of 2013, when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that same-sex couples can receive the same tax benefits from the federal government as opposite-sex couples. They struck down DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act. And so now that created a situation where same-sex couples, married couples who've been married in a state where it's legal, if they move to a state where it's not legal, they can file their federal taxes, married filing jointly, but in the state, they have to file separately. It's created just this odd dissonance, even in tax laws. And last June, when the Supreme Court made that decision, Justice Antonin Scalia correctly predicted that the Supreme Court's ruling would lead to states overturning their bans on same-sex marriage, because this is just an unsustainable situation where the federal government grants rights, but a particular state doesn't. He was correct. So now we're seeing just this wave of federal judges saying the state ban doesn't hold up. Some people, again, protest that. Well, it's activist judges, but public opinion in that state is close to legalizing same-sex marriage anyway. So overall, in my opinion, this is why we're seeing a wave of states legalizing same-sex marriage. I played this video before. I have to play it again, because I think it's the best 1-minute clip I've seen that sums up the same-sex marriage debate and why it's becoming legal and will eventually be legal across the country. And it comes from an unlikely source, Bill O'Reilly on Fox News. It's the number one rated cable program in cable news, number one in Fox News. And this is a 1-minute conversation between Bill O'Reilly and Megyn Kelly discussing same-sex marriage last year. I do. I agree with you. There you go. Just love watching Bill O'Reilly's mannerisms and turn off the music. Wait a minute. That clip sums up the debate in this country, and it was also a signal from Fox News that they're going to put this issue away. When the number one rated host said that, and what they're referring to there were the Supreme Court arguments that were going on at the time. This is early in 2013. And I talked to the pastor a few years ago, and who had more of the traditional view of same-sex marriage, and he was a nice guy. Because Bill O'Reilly mentioned Bible thumping. There's thumping the Bible. He's a nice guy, and he didn't proclaim his opinion loudly. He was civil. He's a loving person, but he had this opinion. He said, "Well, I always vote against same-sex marriage because, and he kind of had a nice soothing pastor voice. When he said, I just believe that marriage is for procreation. See, he's a nice guy. A very nice way of saying he wasn't loud, he wasn't mean, he wasn't angry. He said, I just believe that marriage is for procreation. And the attorney that argued before the Supreme Court against same-sex marriage used that argument. And what happened was astounding. Very quickly, somebody said, well, about 15% of opposite-sex couples struggle with infertility. So should we invalidate their marriages? And then Justice Kagan, a female justice, dropped that line. She said, if a 55-year-old man and a 55-year-old woman get married, not many kids are coming out of that relationship. There was loud laughter in the courtroom, and they moved on. So Bible thumping doesn't have to be loud and angry and mean. What Bible thumping can look like is, no matter how civilly and nicely it's said, that pastor's belief lasted 30 seconds in the Supreme Court. You follow me? The rationale he gives for why his church does what it does, the reason he votes the way he does, and for being a part of a culture where 91% of non-church-going 20-somethings think Christians are anti-gay, his rationale for that lasted 30 seconds in court. Bible thumping can also mean saying things using the Bible that just don't make rational sense to many people. Using the Bible to say things that you can easily poke holes in a matter of seconds to the point that it's funny and people laugh and move on. I think that's also what can be meant by thumping the Bible. When there just doesn't seem to be a rational reason other than, well, I have some Bible verses that say some stuff, but I don't know that I'm even interpreting them accurately, but that just doesn't hold up in court or in public opinion. So that brings us to, what does the Bible say? What does the Bible say about same-sex marriage? What does it say about same-sex couples? And in order to talk about the Bible, we're going to talk about Paul and Jesus. Always a good move when you want to talk about the Bible and important issues. And what we need to understand is there are 6 or 7 passages in the Old Testament and the New Testament that speak to same-sex acts. And those passages are often referred to as the clobber passages because they've been used to clobber people. Not all Christians have done this, but some have used those passages to kind of clobber people who are gay. And 3 of those passages in the New Testament come from what's the traditional belief of the authorship of those letters is that they come from Paul. So 3 of the New Testament clobber passages are said to have come from Paul. Now, so we're going to spend a couple of minutes talking about what Paul says. All of those statements in the Bible are negative. And last fall, I read them. And we found out that they're actually quite harsh. It's a slogan now in America to say that marriage is between one man and one woman. That's an American political slogan that is palatable to some voters. If a politician stood up and actually reads what the Old Testament and some parts of the New Testament say about people who have same-sex relations, that politician would be booed off the stage and people would tell him to get lost. Because the truth is, no matter how hard it might be for some to admit, the language used in the Bible is no longer acceptable in the 21st century developed world pertaining to people who are gay. And so when we want to interpret any message, no matter what it is, if it's from the Bible, if it's from a news article, is the context. Con means with the text. So if I don't know anything else about my wife, all I have is the text, let's go out on Friday. But I know some things about my wife. And I know from context, when I read that text, let's go out on Friday, here's what my wife means. She wants to go out to a nice romantic dinner on Friday. in a nice, cool place with some good food, kind of dim lighting, and some cool music, and just have a meal and a couple hours just to relax and talk and catch up from the busyness of life. And I know that's what my wife means by the text, let's go out this Friday, because I know the context of it. Imagine if I got that text on Monday and I said, oh, Hannah wants to go out on Friday, cool. Oh, there's a mixed martial arts event on Friday night in Central Phoenix. She'll love it. Like mixed martial arts where the guys bash each other's faces in. There are actually pastors that are doing mixed martial arts for Jesus now. There was a documentary recently where pastors are like getting into the octagon, and they're like, I'm gonna prove that you can win any spiritual battle you face, and they just beat this guy's face in the octagon. Like, I'm not sure that's what the Bible means by spiritual battle. But what if I said, oh, there's an MMA event. Let's take Hannah there on Friday. Friday night would not go very well for me. Because I read the text, but I didn't consider the context, and I didn't ask the question to interpret a text. What was the author thinking? Does that make sense? Is this complicated? It's quite simple, isn't it? So here's our question. When we read something written by the Apostle Paul, we ask, what was Paul thinking when he wrote that? More specifically, was Paul thinking of same-sex relationships the same way we do in the 21st century developed world? Because this is bigger than just America. In the green countries. Was Paul thinking of same-sex relationships differently than we do in the green countries? Now, here's what we know about the context in which Paul was writing. It's the Greco-Roman world. You've heard me talk about the fact the Roman Empire was the ruling authority where Paul lived, and the Romans loved Greek culture. Some people engage in same-sex relationships for lust, basically for thrills, for kicks. And that was looked down on by some people in the society. In the Greco-Roman world, we know that same-sex relations were often associated with three things: pedastry, pagan temple prostitution, and sex slavery. Pedastry was the common practice. We don't have a hook to hang this on in America because we don't get this, but it was true in the Greco-Roman world. Pedastry was often a married, heterosexual person with a minor of the same sex. A married man, a man married to a woman who has a boy on the side. And we're like, what? That was common in the Greco-Roman world. The philosophers criticized it. We call that pedophilia. Is pedophilia disgusting? You bet it is. And so it appears that when you're talking about same-sex relations in the Greco-Roman world, I hate to even talk about this because these are still slurs that some people think, and it's awful. Right? But we have to talk about these things to try to build a bridge. Pagan temple prostitution was, again, foreign to us. There were several religions in the Greco-Roman world that involved sexual acts as an act of worship. And a guy who's married to a woman might go to a temple and say, well, got to go to church, honey. And he would have a sexual relationship in that temple. And often it would be a same-sex relationship. The person might be a minor. The person might also be a slave. And so you have all kinds of just human dignity being violated, slavery, economic disadvantage, all of these things taking place as a part of Greco-Roman religion. And finally, like I said, sex slavery. It's estimated up to 30-40% of the city of Rome in the time of Jesus were slaves. You could rape a slave. If you were a citizen, you could rape a slave and not have a legal consequence. So there are people who would just kind of want thrills, and they would engage in these various behaviors. And that seems to be wrapped up in the way that same-sex relations were viewed in the ancient world. So, again, this isn't complicated. This is a very simple thing. If you could, figure out Marty McFly's DeLorean time machine, and you could go back and talk to Paul, and say, Paul, same-sex relationships, go. Paul is going to give you a list that include all of these things. Now, if Paul jumped in the DeLorean with you and could come back here. And Paul learned about our society 2,000 years after his in the developed world. Imagine this. Imagine in all the controversy of this issue, if we could transport Paul to 2014 right here in the Southeast Valley, and Paul got to learn the knowledge that we have now. Imagine if this happened. Hey, Paul, do you still believe what you wrote about same-sex relations? And Paul's like, guys, come on. That's 2,000 years ago. Imagine for a moment. Guys, what has happened in world knowledge in the past 2,000 years? I didn't know anything about medicine either. We drilled holes in people's skulls back then to let the demons out. That's how we thought you cured mental illness. We've gained knowledge. Come on, guys. Imagine that. I'm not trying to be irreverent. This is where I'm coming from. If Paul said, guys, that was in context. You have the text that I wrote, but you have to consider the context in which I wrote. Now, in 2014, America, most of us have parsed these things apart to where we understand that some of these things about people who are gay are awful slurs and they're not true. And it reminds you of the things that have been said about ethnic minorities in our country. And we understand now that there are people who want to make a lifelong commitment to one another. And they want to bring their kids to church. And they want their kids to learn about Jesus. And they don't want their kids to hear how bad their family is in church and be condemned as they grow up. Those are the kind of folks we have in one church. And that are in lots of churches, even churches that don't accept them, because they want to know Jesus and they want to grow and they want to be a part of a church. Here's what I know for sure. Again, we're building a bridge, and this is my opinion, but I'm 100% on this one. And just for what it's worth, this is my opinion. But I'm not 99, I'm 100% on this one. When Paul wrote these passages, he wasn't thinking of a same-sex couple here in our church wanting to bring their children to Sunday school to learn about Jesus. I'm 100% on that one. That's not who Paul was thinking of. And to take text out of context and to lay it on people who are wanting to raise their children in church, to me, is a travesty. And it's another reason why we're seeing this wave of legalization sweeping across the country. As Bill O'Reilly said, it's Bible thumping. And there have to be rational reasons behind that. All right, that brings me to discussing Jesus, and we're going to wrap up soon. Now, there are well-meaning people who believe that Jesus said something about same-sex relationships. There are people who love God and love the Bible who believe that there are a couple of passages, Mark 10, Matthew 19, where Jesus discusses divorce. And they're well-meaning people who love God and love the Bible, and they think those passages pertain to same-sex marriages. I would disagree with them. I think the passages are about divorce. And so we don't have the time to go into the day. What I did was I wrote a blog post addressing the different points that might be made, and you can read that today at the incredibly narcissistic web address of ryangear.com. If you would like to learn more about what Jesus said about same-sex marriage, my answer is nothing. It's a passage about divorce. Mark 10 and Matthew 19 are actually a little bit different in the response that Jesus gives. If we wanted to use that passage to make a law, the law wouldn't be about same-sex marriage, the law would be about divorce, because that's what the passage is about, but we wouldn't be sure how to make that law because it says a couple of different things. And if we decided, well, let's pick a happy medium and make a law, what's actually presented in the Pharisees' question to Jesus is more strict than current Muslim Sharia law in Saudi Arabia. It would be very, very difficult to use this passage to make any law, but especially to criticize people in a same-sex marriage. So, I'm going to wrap it up. A friend of mine, a couple of years ago, we were having a conversation about this, and he had the more traditional view, and he said, it seems like the Bible loses, and you have these culture wars, and the people, they bash the Bible, and they move on, and they just want to do liberal things, and we capitulate to the culture. Christians in America, we just capitulate to the culture. And what I said in response was, well, it's true that when we have these big cultural debates, there are parts of the Bible that lose. There are parts of the Bible that were used to support slavery. I posted on Facebook this week a speech from Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist in the 1800s. If you haven't read that, you really need to go to the One Church Facebook page and read his speech. And it'll make your skin crawl to see how the Bible has been used in the past. I said, well, and the Bible is used to oppress women, what we would legitimately call oppression. And just to argue against women's rights, the Bible's been used to argue against science and scientific development in a way that most people just reinterpret those passages now. But there are some things in the Bible that never lose. And it's the teaching of Jesus. Jesus wins. It's this: teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? A very religious man asked Jesus. Verse 37, Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets, the whole kit and caboodle, the whole shebang of religion hangs on these commandments. Love God with all your heart. Love your neighbor as yourself. There are scholars who say this is the teaching that ended slavery in America. This is the reason that there is such a thing as human dignity and human rights in this world, is because this statement is the foundation for ethics. It's the foundation for all morality. It's empathy to treat other people the way you want to be treated. There are some passages in the Bible that lose over time, but Jesus always wins. So I want to wrap up with this. There's a couple in our church who shared their story with me. We have several couples in one church who are same-sex couples, and there's a couple in our church named Liz and Lori, and have a picture of them when we baptized their children. Way back at Hancock Elementary School. You remember those days, and the plastic chairs? And I know this sermon is a little long. Cushion chairs. That's all I'm going to say, all right? So remember these days? Look at their beautiful children. And Liz and Lori were together for a while, and they had their first set of twins. And they started to get a little bit older, and their 4-year-old daughter asked them if they were married, because she had some friends she played with, and their parents were married. And they said, no, we're not married. Why? And they had to explain to her that some states allow, they would allow their moms to get married, and some states wouldn't. And now they were getting to the place where they're going to have their second set of twins. And the little girl, 4-year-old girl, said, Mommies, you have to get married before you have the babies. And so we ought to start talking about this. And they started doing research, and they found out that Illinois, at that time, allowed civil unions. And so they decided to have a ceremony and get a civil union. And every day leading up to that, their daughter was asking, are you going to get married? Are you going to get married? And they decided they were going to get a civil union. So they flew to Illinois on November 20th, 2012. They were joined by a civil union. Now, even with a civil union, there were some fears. Now, I didn't realize this before they shared their story with me. I just hadn't thought about it. And most people probably haven't. Because their relationship wasn't recognized, they could not have both of their names on their children's birth certificate. So imagine this, if you're a parent. You don't have to be a parent to imagine this. If your child is in the hospital, you may not be able to get in because you're not related to your child, see? And so they had these kinds of emotional fears that they had to deal with. And there were financial disadvantages as well. They were in Colorado at the time, in order to get both names on the birth certificate, they had to adopt their own children in order to be legally recognized as parents. And of course, that had a financial cost. Another example, these are some things they just said there are disadvantages to couples, was with health insurance. They're on Liz's health care insurance, and Liz's health insurance came out pre-tax, but Lori's insurance was paid for after tax. So they weren't getting the tax savings, just little things, on health care that opposite sex couples could have. Most of all, they wanted what marriage means for their family. So last year, Illinois passed a new law, and that law went into effect June 1st of this year. and it made same-sex marriage legal in the state of Illinois. And they decided to really make good on their promise to their little girl. And they got on a plane, and they flew to Illinois. And just 10 days ago, on Thursday, August 14th, Liz and Lori changed their civil union to a marriage in the state of Illinois. So they can tell their 4-year-old daughter, yes, we are married, actually. Can we say congratulations to Liz and Lori? And they said there were lots of advantages. Of course, they gained peace of mind with the children and the legal issues. Finances are a little bit easier, although Arizona doesn't recognize their marriage. Most of all, they said, we gained the fact that the commitment that we've made to each other is recognized by our country. That our society recognizes that, yes, we do love each other. We want to commit to each other. We want to raise a family in church. And that's okay with our society. We have a few couples in one church who are same-sex couples, some married, some not. And I just want to say to all of you, we love you. I love you. Many people here love you. I'm glad you're here. And you are a valuable part of this congregation, and you're a part of my family. See, now, the farther I go in this issue, when I realize some of the struggles that people face, these are my people now. This isn't a political issue. These are people, I'm a pastor. These are people in my church family, and I love them. And I know I'm not going to stand for that, for people that I love. And so I want you to know that you are a member of this family, and we are thrilled that you are here. And so, in conclusion, yes, this is a divisive issue still in the United States. Numbers tell us it's not going to be much longer. 5 years, 10 years, it's not going to be. But there are Christians who, because of a view of the Bible, and in my opinion, the political influence on evangelical Christianity, who are struggling with this, and there is a divide. I just want to maybe give an invitation to folks who are there who say, Ryan, I just don't agree with you. I want to give you this invitation. Would you consider, and I'm asking you humbly, would you consider maybe just saying, there are a lot of questions around the interpretation of a few passages in the Bible. And I see that 91% of unchurched 20-somethings view Christians as anti-gay. Maybe I would be willing to just suspend judgment and say, I'm just going to let God be the judge. And I don't feel the need to speak against people who are gay. I'm just going to let God be the judge. I wonder if there are some who would take up that invitation. We'll let God be the judge. One more thing. I have a challenge for some folks. If there are folks who are sitting on the fence, they're not quite sure what to think. Well, maybe this interpretation's right, maybe it's not. I'm really not sure. I'm a challenge to you. I want you to consider how serious this is. My challenge is to figure this out. And if you support gay rights, say it out loud while it still matters. That's my challenge to you. According to the Gallup poll we saw, a significant portion of Americans just recently figured out that it's okay for black people to marry white people. Wouldn't it have been nice had they figured it out in the 1960s? Wouldn't that have saved our country a great deal of division and pain and embarrassment in the 1960s? Wouldn't it have been nice that instead of figuring out that interracial marriage is okay, and many of those people quoted the Bible, instead of figuring it out in 2006, had they figured it out in 1966? My challenge is, if you're on the fence, really, really work on this and decide what you believe. And if you're supportive, say it while it still matters, while the division is still there, and you can help to heal some of this division. Our country is changing in its views. And in my view, followers of Jesus have the opportunity to show the love of Jesus to help us bridge this divide. I pray we can do that.